Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are dialing in from. And welcome to our monthly-ish or two-monthly-ish gathering of Space for Change. These are topics voted by you, for you, our change community. So really excited to kick us off. Before we start, oh, sorry, Fran, too early for all this energy. I've had about 3 cups of coffee already. So sorry, not sorry. But let's keep some psychosocial safety while we do all this morning as well. Do me a favor. I want to hear who's here and I want to see you all. So jump into the chat. Say hello and let me know where in the world you are zooming in from so we can see who is with us. So we know Fran's here. Good to see you, Fran. I know it's quite early for you in Perth. We've got Tracy from Brisbane. Hello, welcome. Ali is from Tassie. It's windy today. Temray's in Sydney. Good to see you. Jody in Adelaide. We've got Anna from Melbourne, and this is her first time here. Welcome aboard, Anna. Good to see you. Patty's in Melbourne. Anna is from Perth. Wow, we've got a lot of Perth people. That's great. Nate is from Newcastle. Fantastic. We've got Eliza from Sydney. Emma from Brisbane's here. Wonderful. We've got someone's walking to work at the morning. Howdy, SJB. We've got Fremantle, Southport, Adelaide, sunny Canberra. We've got Colleen from Sydney. First time. Welcome aboard. Rebecca Cox is in Auckland. Great to see New Zealand in the house. Denise from Bundaberg. Hi, Andrea. I'm from Melbourne. Thanks, Catherine. David K. from Gadigal Land, Sydney. We've got Laura from Brisbane. JP, somewhere between asleep and awake in Sydney. Lovely to see you, JP. Fahana, good to see you. We saw you last night, and here you are today from Melbourne. We've got Beth in Perth. Oh, Sam in LA. Good to see you. Wonderful to have you there. We've got Naomi in Melbourne. Margarita from Melbourne. Got Laura in Sydney, Kirsten in Sydney. We've got Joe from Perth, and we've got Leonie. Good to see you. And Michelle Tinnis. Good to see you both. Well, welcome aboard. Oh, Deanna's from New Zealand as well. Really good to have you here. And as we said earlier, the hot topic that seems to be on a lot of our minds is psychosocial hazards and change management. So if this is your first time, we have a LinkedIn group called Space for Change. It's on LinkedIn, and we've been voting for topics over the last 2.5 years and actually getting things. And we actually asked the community, did you guys want a panel discussion on psychosocial hazards? Did you want sort of a couple of speakers? And everyone actually asked for an expert deep dive. So I'm really, really excited to say that we've got Alexander Dray, who is an organizational psychologist, thank goodness, so can probably shed a lot of good light onto this. And a big shout out to Michelle Tinnis. I actually wanted to start off and thank Michelle because I had no idea about psychosocial hazards. Who here had absolutely no idea what the hell people meant by this? Okay, Tracy, Fran, Laura, thanks for being honest. I was one of those people. And Michelle Tinnis, she joined one of our programs, and obviously she's been on Space for Change before, and she was just so clued up on that. And the reason for that is she worked on a big client where this became, a big area for change, and she worked alongside with Alexander. So a big thank you to Michelle, firstly, for getting me across this before I could sort of tackle this. And she highly recommended Alexander Drain, who she'd worked with. So massive thank you, Michelle. And Michelle will be in the chat, by the way, if you want to sort of chat a bit. And she's our keyboard warrior, as always. Big hello to Christina. I know you're flying between USA, Australia, all over the world. So Christina's our partner in the US. And yeah, let's kick off psychosocial hazards and change management. So before we do, I know it's a very serious topic, but I thought we'd start with a little bit of humor. We had another video from MBA-ish. Who follows MBA-ish on Instagram? Okay, great. Alexander does. So really funny one, but we kind of thought it might be a bit controversial, but we went onto TikTok and we found this video, and this is typically the reaction a lot of the uninformed people, maybe outside of our circles, somehow tackle psychosocial hazards. So we thought we'd start with a bit of humor and then get into the serious stuff. Is that okay with everyone? Awesome. Hi, TikTok.
Listen up, everyone. Now, I know a lot of you are stressed right now with your workload, okay? And I want you to know that mental health and well-being is very important to us at this company, okay? So, I'm very excited to announce that to help, we are being given less work. No. Going down to 4-day week. No. Getting pay rises. No. Hiring more staff to help with the workload. Nah. Have more breaks throughout the day. No. Have longer lunch breaks. No. More holiday. Yes. Really? No. Oh. It's better than all that. We're going to have a mental health webinar. So, but if you've got a lot on, then feel free to skip it and just work through lunch.
So who can kind of relate to that by show of hands? It's just this insane thing, hey? So welcome to your mental health webinar today. And let's get into the serious stuff because we've actually got to demystify a lot of this and get serious about psychosocial hazards. So while we're here, folks, thanks to Michelle, who informed me of this, but two things have happened. Globally, the ISO standards, which are the international standards that a lot of organizations either have to or choose to apply to follow, has actually got standards around psychosocial hazards. And they, just like a workplace injury, if you worked in mining, for example, they're now saying that you can get mental injuries and psychosocial injuries from particular things in work. Now, in Australia, and a lot of places in the States, but particularly Australia, a lot of our states have actually incorporated this into their legislation. And what they've done is they've actually listed out a whole bunch of things that are psychosocial hazards that we need to watch for, identify, and make sure we've got controls and systems to prevent this from happening and to learn and continue to go through. And I'm not going to go into anything more because Alex would actually... Alex is actually going to go into quite a lot of detail around that. So if you look at it, the one that really stands out for me is poor change management. Hey, funny that, hey, is now being identified as a psychosocial hazard, which means, well, if we're not consulting people, if we're not communicating properly, if we're not managing the change properly, people can get an injury, just like a physical injury, but a traumatic, stressful injury around their work. And it's not to say stress is the issue, but continuous stress and continuously bad managed change is one. So if you have a look at that list, I want to ask the group, jump into the chat for me. How many of those have you experienced or witnessed in your career? So if you look at the list, burnout, bullying, sexual harassment, remote or isolated work, how many of those? And just give me the number. Nate says every single one. Alex says all of them. Laura says 8, all of them. 5, most of them. 8, 5, 6, all of them. 90%, all. Isn't this scary, guys? So we're a group of about 56 people right now, and we're saying at least more than 5 we've seen or experienced in the workplace. So pretty alarming that this is quite prevalent, but we're now putting a magnifying glass on this. So we asked our community this, and the results were spot on. The majority of people, almost 70%, said more than 5 of those psychosocial hazards they'd experienced or witnessed in their career. So pretty alarming that this is going on, and obviously it's an issue that has been going on for some time. The other thing we asked is this the same thing as psychological safety? And what was interesting is we asked our community this, and most people said, no, they're actually different concepts. And where we landed in our group discussion, and you're welcome to go into our LinkedIn group and check it out, is we said that psychological safety is what happens in that moment where people feel safe to volunteer ideas, whereas psychosocial hazards is about the controls, the systems, the policies, the procedures that actually take care of us at work to prevent and avoid psychosocial risks that we listed there. And then the really interesting stat was, well, which approaches actually help and support psychological and psychosocial safety when it comes to change management? And what was astounding was that 81% of our audience actually said co-creation and human-centered design. Now, obviously, at Tomaz, this is a big one for us. We're very big on using design thinking, co-creation, collaborative tech to do this. So this really gave us reassurance that there's people out there not just using this, but realizing that, and the standards will speak about that, that a process of consultation with people during change is really key, not just to address psychosocial hazards, but to also identify them. So that all came from you, our community, and some stats there to arm us and just see what the conversation is happening as it starts emerging. Is that useful? Awesome. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alexander Drain. He has some amazing experience. Obviously, this is a new topic, but he's got a strong org psychology background. He's worked quite closely with Michelle in Change, so he totally gets our world. And he's worked primarily initially in mining, oil and gas, where obviously safety is a priority. And they've started embracing a lot of psychosocial hazards and controls around this. So he's probably leading the way in terms of this. And now he's coming to finance and he's looking at this from a risk perspective. So hell of a nice guy. I had a conversation with him probably about 2 months ago, Alex. And it was supposed to be half an hour. I think we went on for like an hour and a half just chatting about this. And I thought, no, this is the guy who probably can start this conversation with the change community with quite a lot of experience under his belt. So Alex, welcome to Space for Change. I'm going to hand over to you and take us through the roller coaster of psychosocial hazards.
Right.
Can we have a round of applause? Round of applause for Alex.
I feel very welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Bring my screen up. There we go. Thanks everyone for joining in. I thought just before I get into some of the content, that Andrew covered off pretty well who I am. I'm an organisational psychologist. I'm based in Perth, Western Australia. I'm surprised a little bit to see some other Perthies on here at this time in the morning. Normally, I'm especially in the working from home life. I'm probably not quite up yet, and I'm rolling out of bed and straight into work in, a bit over an hour's time. I've been working in the psychosocial risk hazard factor space for about 6 years in depth. So I felt like when I started my journey in this space, it was a very novel concept. I was always having to explain, what I did, what this space is, what psychosocial means, and we've still got a long way to go, but the enthusiasm and the way that I think in Australia, organisations have started to embrace this work is really exciting. The fact that all of you are here is an indication of that. Definitely would have happened, 5 or 6 years ago. It would have been me and maybe one other person in a room with a few cupcakes or something like that. I was thinking as well as Andrew was speaking, because it is 6:15 in the morning, why am I here? Why did I decide to do this when, Michelle put me in touch with Andrew? And I think a big reason is because I really believe that the people in this room form the advance guard for this space, the vanguard kind of, if you will. You guys are going to be the ones who are going out to your organisations and advocating for this work, hopefully, for educating senior leaders and organisations about this work, for you're communicating to your executive, to implementing yourself in projects and transformation. And that's a pretty cool thing. So, when I was sitting here and I'm halfway through my first coffee of the day and I wrote my why, that's a pretty cool why. A few things that I want to acknowledge, certainly it's just going to be a taste test today with the time that we've got. So I want you all to keep that in mind. If you've got any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Andrew. I think, as Andrew said, Michelle's in the chat and she's a fountain of good information. So she'll be answering questions along the way. I do want to preface that what I'm talking about today doesn't constitute any form of legal advice or guidance, just the asterisk there. And then the last call out for me before I get into it is to not panic. There's there's a bit of a journey with this. Some people, some organisations, some parts of the world are further along in that journey than others. I think if we get too concerned and worried, we can risk feeling a bit overwhelmed, and that can de-energize us a little bit. It goes in the too hard basket. So small steps are good steps, right? I mean, I'm speaking to the converted here when it comes to things like that. Any momentum, I think, is some good momentum. So with that, I'll get into it. What I'm going to cover today, I love Andrew's approach, getting feedback from all of you and forming and using that to form some outline for the content. So we're going to start with demystifying psychosocial hazards and risks. We're going to talk about the impact that maybe some of the legislation and guidance could have on all of you and how that might relate. A little bit about why it's important to invest in psychosocial hazards. I know from experience it can be a hard sell, so a little bit of support there. And some examples of how can we start to fit those in. I've put the steps to start the conversation in red down the bottom because we will speak about that at a few different points. So I thought it doesn't necessarily need its own section, but I will be discussing that as well. Let's get down to basics, right? Psychosocial hazard is anything that could cause psychological harm. That's the safe work definition as it currently stands. Depending on depending on your familiarity with the psychological harm as a term and where you are in the world, it can look a little bit different. Sometimes they'll talk about psychological and social harm, where there's a distinction between the psychological components to health and your relational components, specifically with work. Under the Australian guidance, they normally merge those terms and just call psychological harm. But you may see that in varying forms. I think let's keep the definition simple. Some of this stuff can be confusing anyway. Let's not overcomplicate it. Hazards can create stress. They can cause a whole range of psychological harm for sure. We'll certainly go through that. Stress itself is not an injury. There's a level of stress that can start to be considered something that's clinical, and stress is normally a precursor to other comorbid conditions. But being stressed or being a bit under the pump, as we'll talk about in reference to demands, does not constitute itself an injury. So I think it's really important as we talk through the hazard and the risk space and we talk about outcomes associated with that, there is some caveat and guidance around like what injury looks like, what levels of risk we might not want to tolerate and what we can tolerate. So it doesn't mean that all forms of stress are bad things. Psychological harm that's common, anxiety, depression, PTSD is alarmingly common in relation to work. Alarmingly common. It's something that I come across more and more in more of a therapeutic setting for sure. I think we would all be able to put our hands up and if it's not us, know someone who's experienced a pretty difficult workplace environment. And the longevity of that impact can be really intense and life-altering, right? So PTSD there for sure. Sleep disorders, I mean, that's probably half the people in this room over the past month, 2 months. You're having some kind of poor night's sleep. It's interfering with your, ability to either get to sleep, to maintain sleep, your level of energy in the day. You might not be getting enough REM sleep. And not to say that just a poor night's sleep is indicative of a disorder. There's some really good research around how psychological health, how the psychosocial hazards are a strong predictor of physical health too. There's a great paper around musculoskeletal injuries. I think this one's from Canada, and the return to work prognosis based on the psychological conditions of the work environment. And if it's an environment without psychosocial hazards, that return is much quicker. So it plays out in that physical space too. It's not just we can put this mental health stuff separately from everything else that we're looking at. It's absolutely co-variable when it comes to the management of physical health. I'm already behind time, guys. All right, here's a list of the most common hazards that you'll see. I think it's really important when you go into a workplace or you start looking for hazards in a workplace that while these are really good categories to start off with, there can be different ones that you find. Like in a complicated physical environment, there can be different hazards that pop up that are unique. Likewise with this, but this is a pretty decent and comprehensive list. I want to quickly define a few for you, but if you'd like to have a better read yourself, Safe Work has a pretty comprehensive definition. To be honest, if you do a quick Google, you'll start to get some good definitions as well. University of Tasmania has some good stuff. But job demands, we're talking about a critical amount of load from a work perspective that's being applied. And that load can look like intensity, it can look like pace, it can look like complexity, right? So any and often a combination of those. You need to do a lot, you need to do it quickly, and the work's not going to be easy. So that's a pretty frequent one that we would all have experienced at some point. Low job control and how that, you might hear the word autonomy. That definitely goes hand in hand with that job control. What sort of agency can we have over our experience? I think an absence of job control, we might start to talk about words like micromanagement, or helicopter management. You can't do anything without someone telling you you're possibly doing a poor job or correcting you or providing guardrails. That might be the structure of a task, the structure of your day. It might be the way deliverables are defined. So that can be a lot of things too. Inadequate reward and recognition. You're definitely something that we see, or I see a lot in most workplaces. It will be one of the most common things that, if you do an engagement survey or anything like that, you'll see reported in the qualitative section, right? We're not happy with our remuneration, but I want to expand that a bit more from remuneration and a financial side of recognition to things like praise, acknowledgement, both formal and informal. So that's the lack of that can be pretty soul crushing, right? And then poor or justice. I'm going to define that one because I know that's probably one that we may be a little bit less familiar with. That's really how much do the policies and procedures actually reflect the reality of the working experience. Okay, yep, so there's an internal job that's opened. Are they seriously considering every candidate that applies, or have they pre-selected someone already? And this is just a thought. This is just we're going to do this so we look like we're doing the right thing. In reality, we're not. We don't care who else applies, and we're going to waste other people's time potentially too. Obviously, we're going to talk a bit about how poor change management plays an important role. Some facts and myths. So we've got some myths on the right. It's too hard, too costly for us to implement. It's not. You take small steps, right? Change some change 101 stuff there. We don't have to do it all at once. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to become a leader overnight. And ultimately, it's associated with positive ROI. So you do make bang for buck with it. Andrew's video summarised how a little bit of training or a webinar is not enough. That's an individual level intervention. I'll talk a bit about intervention shortly. No one will ever know. I'll talk about that shortly too. The one I do want to quickly go through there is it's the same as psychological safety. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's unfortunate that the two terms started to get a little bit more popular at the same time. Psychological safety is a reference to Amy Edmondson's work around, feeling like an environment is safe. There's a healthy amount of conflict. You can make a mistake and there's like an appropriate response. You're not, dragged over the coals. You can speak up. You can challenge safely, all those sort of things. That relates to the psychosocial piece in that you can imagine the absence of that might play out in some of the hazards that we saw on the previous page. form of bullying, for example, but they're not the same terms and should never be used interchangeably. And I go so far as to very, very often put that distinction in whenever I'm doing any content with organizations, with leadership teams, because if you don't clarify that, that can set you back a really long way, because there might be a perception that we're already doing that in the form of leadership training or development. All hazards are risks, so that's in the middle. Is that a fact or is that a myth? It's a bit of both. Okay, so when we look at if a hazard is a risk, we think about these things: frequency, duration, severity. Very important. You know, it's the world is tricky to manage, right? It's okay if there's maybe okay is not the right word. It's understandable if there's a day where you've got demands that are too high, because sometimes that's what happens. And that feels stress as a response. That's an acceptable response. And we lose a little bit of sleep. There's a lot of things that prevent us from getting a good night's sleep. What is unacceptable is if the duration and the frequency that increases. Likewise, there are some hazards that we'll see where they'll be quite frequent, but that severity is really low. Really low. I think autonomy is a good example of that, or that job control. You know, we might have a lot of little things that we don't have control over, but we're not too bothered by it. You know, okay, yep, I kind of get that we've got to do it this way. It's no real drama. Why focused on risk? I think this is suggested in a lot of guidance around the world that you'll see. Hierarchy of controls. How do we do things to manage psychosocial hazards and risks? We can see that we've got primary, secondary, tertiary controls. Primary are our gold standard controls, typically prevent. They're the most effective in terms of both their efficacy and value for money. Deloitte have a really good ROI calculator for things like this. So use that if you need to. That's been handy before. Secondary, response mitigation, tertiary supportive. That's where our EAP is going. Employee assistance provider. Really important service. I like to clarify that's. I do have a little bit of a gripe sometimes with people who suggest that that's not something worth pursuing. That's done a lot of good for a lot of people, but we've got to acknowledge its place in this hierarchy of controls and how we can be a bit more proactive and preventive. Right. Here's a list you can see of some of the organisations or institutes out there that provide a little bit of guidance. ISO is a great place to look because they give you a lot of support about how to structure up and manage psychosocial hazards at work. You can use a combination of ISO 45003, which is the psychosocial one, but also 45001, which is just your typical OSH management one. It's a bit of info in there. That's a good place to start, especially if you're going into an organisation that already does that physical management stuff and has an OH&S system in place.
Alex, just on that slide, we've got a question from the group, but does that slide go, like we understand per change management has some standards that it's not consultative. Do the other factors like reward and recognition, inadequate, do they get covered in some of these standards in terms of what good looks like? And
good question. They're almost in all of them, you'll see some sort of approximated list of those same hazards. The others will do a varying job at defining what good and bad looks like, and that's because often they're made to give regulators a little bit of bandwidth to come in and apply judgment. So you can monitor a bit for that. They'll give you a high-level definition. They might give you some examples, but beyond that, it's often not prescriptive because it's abstract and difficult to measure. It can look like a lot of different things. So keep that in mind. The definitions will widely be very consistent, which is great. So from having done work in South America and in Chile and Canada, Singapore, the definitions are basically word for word, which is handy. For those of you who might not be familiar with the term, so PCBU, person conducting business, it is expected in Australia that they're, identifying reasonably foreseeable psychosocial hazards could give rise to health and safety risks. I'll give you a few examples shortly about times that that's gone wrong, but that is the expectation, and that's the PCBU. That'll be the reference of the Work Health and Safety Act. I still don't know for sure if this is a photoshopped picture or not. I don't know if ostriches actually do this, but the ostrich effect will no longer cut it. Yeah, so I'm very unfortunate in the Kozarov, the State Victoria case. Well, a good outcome, but a poor situation that has to do with vicarious trauma at work, the management of exposure to really sensitive materials in a prosecutor in Victoria, and how they had policies and procedures in place, as in they had them written down. They weren't applied or executed upon. There was documented long-term evidence of harm. And that went to the High Court on appeal. And the High Court found that there was a reasonable expectation that could have been managed more effectively, because there was an acknowledgement that traumatic material could be troubling, right? So that there was an acceptance of that. In fact, if you Google the case, you can go through and look at the judge's notes. I would suggest that if you're wanting to work in this space a little bit more. There's another example, which was through the coroner's office, unfortunately, where there was a recent suicide, and there is some pretty complex sort of prosecution work on the back of that's currently going on. Depending on where you are, definitely in Australia, this can result, based on the legislation. It hasn't started happening too much yet, from as far as I know, but this can result in jail time for directors, in the same way that if you're a responsible manager for a mine site, you're the general manager, the registered manager, RM, and fatality or an injury, and there's any evidence of negligence or oversight or not prioritising health and safety aspect, there can be individual level fines and jail time, as well as the organisational elements. So do keep that in mind. It's health and safety. There's physical and the psychological components we're talking about, but it's health and safety, and that's important when interpreting the legislation more and more. Here's the recommended process you will see in a lot of different places. You'll see most, if not all, of the Australian guidance. Sorry, you will see this in some American guidance. You'll see this in Canadian guidance to a slightly different degree. Identify, assess, intervene, control, monitor, review. Right. That's probably not something that's new to most of the people in this room. It applies to the psychosocial components too, in the same way that you might apply it in a lot of different other different risk settings, financial risk. I've seen this applied, right? So the model's not new. We know that it's been effective over a long period of time of managing other kinds of undesirable behaviours or events. So it seems reasonable to me that we're adopting this one for the psychosocial components. Two questions here. Is your business focused on proactive prevention of harms arising from work-related risks, psychological health and safety? That's sort of just a bit of a reflection question for you guys. Does your business implement prevention strategies? If not, and you're in a capacity to influence that, I would start that conversation sooner than later. There's work currently underway in the Australian Productivity Commission around the efficacy of controls and interventions to manage psychosocial health and safety. They'll want to know that if you did that pizza party or that barbecue to manage workplace factors, that there's evidence around identification and assessment of that hazard, and there's some sort of monitoring around the efficacy of that solution. Believe it or not, pizza party can actually be a good control if it's, the hazards are around workplace culture and sort of team cohesion and that kind of stuff, right? But if you're doing that just for the sake of it and there's not proof in the pudding, then you can be in trouble there too. So ask yourself these two questions, maybe take them away to your workplace. Why? So this goes to the at the beginning, the two different points there: why to invest, but also how to start to communicate this to your leaders. So why is this psychosocial component important? And we start, you can see on the x-axis there, that human-centered value. So at the top, we've got the most human-centered value, if you like, or the most sort of altruistic, if I use that word. Compassion, care, community. It does relate to some of your social governance work, your sustainability work around the people sustainability. It's kind of a enmeshment there that we're starting to more and more. It's the right thing to do. We want to have a positive impact, not just on the our customers or our clients, but the people who work within our organisation, because they form part of a community within the office walls and a community more broadly, especially if you're part of a large organisation or working with a large organisation, and especially if that large organisation has significant or substantive work in rural or regional areas, because you greatly shape the community environment through organisational based decisions. And that's a call out, I think, to some of our miners or oil and gas organisations there. Probably, I'm in Perth, right? Mining, iron ore up north. There are communities, and if I think Goldfields Way as well, communities that are built around these mining hubs, so that it's not just the community that exists 9 to 5. It's the broader community, the effect that has on, the children in the area that might not have anything to do with the organisation directly, but are firmly impacted by people's experience at work. Performance, the people work better when hazards are removed. We're better performers. It's a great sell, the psychosocial work. It's easy. There's a lot of incentive for us to do it. We've often been doing it in different ways anyway. Okay, some when it comes to bullying, okay, we need to remove that, because if someone's being bullied, obviously it's wrong. Community care, the compassion care community. But that person's probably not working as well as they could be. And if they're not working as well as they could be, and they're taking more time off, and we've got a workers' comp case in, and Safe Work's coming in and giving us an improvement notice and maybe a fine, that's affecting our bottom line. 3 different levers you can pull, and I found that you normally have to pull a combination of the 3 to get this across, depending on the level that you're pitching at. I try to get a combination of all 3 in, because if you're pitching to a room, that might resonate with different people differently. Here's a bit more of a breakdown on what I've talked about there. I've gone through some of the costs there. I'm sure you guys are familiar with some of the mental health that's around impact to economy, compliance for sure, right? If the carrot won't work, then maybe the stick. You got to do it. Yep. Acknowledging different levels of maturity in different organisations, jail time, investigations, right? We don't want that. Some of the culture one, if you have a quick read through there, that makes a lot of sense. But I want to call out the competition one. In tight labour markets, it makes a big difference. Big difference. When there's a skill shortage, it makes a big difference. Can you retain your people? It is easier to retain people than hire new ones. It is cheaper. It is more effective. So you make sure that you're keeping your people. You want to make sure that they're happy. they're often your most important commodity, right? I mean, as a psychologist, I'm biased, but I think most of us would agree. So we need to, know that we need to manage that from a competitive lens. To my point around panicking, it will take time. It will take time. That might seem like a lot. I hope I haven't alarmed anyone. I don't want to seem like someone out to give you guys a mild panic on this Wednesday morning. But it's a journey we've got to start, and we can start it in a lot of different ways. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can begin that over the next 10, 15 minutes. The specific reference to change. That's why I didn't touch on it before. Poor change management. We would all have seen it done before, I'm sure, without a doubt. If not, I want to work where you're working. It can cause a lot of psychological injury. It can cause a lot of turnover, a lot of distress. Definitely things that are undesirable for an organisation and an individual. One of the best things we can do is have a good human-centered change experience. And it seems like I'm preaching to the convert here based on Andrew's poll. So we need to be considerate about the change that we employ, about engaging with people. I'll talk. I'm going to start going back and forward if I'm not careful. I do that. So here's some components of hazardous change. I'll give you guys a second to have a quick read through as I read a few out. Lack of leadership support, insufficient consultation in any form, right? Change is happening to you, not with you. Lack of consideration for capacity, I think, is a really important one. Change takes effort. It takes energy. And if people are already working 6 days in their 5 days, then you can't expect to fit in the time and effort expected to go through a large-scale change, right? So how are we considering capacity? That's really important as it relates to job demands. Just giving you a second to look through those. Lack of clear accountability. Not just for the change process, but for the outcome of the change, where we end up. Okay, my accountabilities were this. Are they different? I'm not sure. Should I be doing different things? Should I be doing the same things? So what can we do? We start off with this identification piece. The consultation piece is so crucial. I've looked at a lot of different data measures with respect to psychosocial hazards. Nothing is as valuable or as rich as qualitative data that normally comes through focus groups and interviews. That extends that extends to the change process. Absolutely. Would this work? Questions like that, basic questions. Would you like this change? How would this experience be for you? What are some of the challenges that we might encounter? How can we start to plan and remove all these barriers early on? Really, really critical questions. Work observation and behaviours. I find this particularly important if you struggle to engage with the most operational level of an organisation. There might be whatever constraints that are preventing you from engaging in that consultation, whether or not it's an organisation funding or sometimes they get a bit cagey, or sometimes they're trying to do it to be protective. Our people are so busy, right? There's some gatekeepers. Observe the work and behaviours. That's important. That's the way we can navigate that. because and why is because it allows us to either confirm or challenge if the version of events we've been told by different levels of the organisation are accurate. Oh, our people aren't stressed or overworked, or they've got plenty of time for breaks and a little bit of chit chat, and they're able to walk to the bathroom a few times a day. That can be a perception that senior leadership have, either knowingly or unknowingly, I suppose, and going to observe things in reality, that can present a different story. I'm going to talk a bit more about the controlling shortly. Just drawing your eyes to the third sentence on this page here. It's going to take a village. Every time I've gone in an organisation, both internally embedded and as an external consultant, I reckon the most critical element of having a sustainable psychosocial risk management process is leveraging multiple areas of the business. You have to. It cannot sit in one place. It cannot. And I will almost put hand on heart and say, if you do it that way, it won't work. It might work for a little bit, but it won't be sustainable. And the business will probably jettison it as soon as things get a little bit too busy and hard. Needs to be embedded across the organisation. Need to have advocates in different places. You need to be engaging with, with risk. With HR, HSE, if an organisation has health and safety. Org development, org design can play a really important role, especially when it comes to planning and implementing controls. So acknowledging exactly what you're there to do, and okay, like if I know I'm only here for this bit, and there might be legacy components to the work that I'm doing that I either I'm not going to be here for or don't want to do, where is this going to sit? And how can I start supporting the organisation of bringing those different people in so they can pick it up after I'm gone if I'm a consultant? When it comes to change and the prevalence of hazards, I'll go straight back to this slide because I'm still reading that. It's not just the change process that is hazardous. I don't think we associate the change process with such high risk, or I don't associate the change process with such high risk because of my behavioural and emotional response to things being different than they were yesterday. That's part of it. Someone saying, "Oh, Alex, you were doing this, and now you got to do something different." I'm like, "Oh God," especially if you haven't brought me along the journey, right? Oh, why do I have to do this now, right? Okay, there's a hazardous component to that, depending on how extreme that change is. But it's because there'll be existing hazards and risk in the environment that you begin the change that can be exacerbated by the change process. If there's almost one statement that I could leave you guys with, it's thinking about it like that. If you're coming into an environment, whether or not you're an internal to an organisation or a consultant, there will be an existing psychosocial hazard landscape already. And any change program you do, any long-term change or transformation, your enterprise change, right? All sort of types of change I'm trying to think of here. Tech change, more tech-driven change will be more successful by you understanding that psychosocial hazard landscape. What's the leadership support like, right? Lack of leadership support's a hazard. Okay, well, it seems like that's something that this organisation doesn't have. This area of the business doesn't have. This division doesn't have. That's going to make my communication from wherever I'm sitting down to an operational level challenging. It might not be cascaded, I might not have advocates throughout the business because they don't have the influence over their people. I need to be more directive then, right? I need to bypass. I'm assuming there that we don't have the option to create that uplift ourselves, and we've just got to manage that with respect to change. Work demands, I mentioned that scenario before, right? If everyone's at absolute capacity, that's going to be problematic if we're expecting people to spend, let's do a physical change, a day moving their desks. I've seen that in a government agency. Everyone is absolutely chock-a-blockers. Like, hey, we're moving office down the road, a few hundred meters. We need you guys to move your stuff. Computers, everything but desks and chairs. We need you to move. Thousands and thousands of records. We also want you to put those into our system electronically. We're not going to change the amount of work you've got to do. We know that you would all be basically expected to do, would be calibrated to do an amount of work anyway, whether we want you to do this on top, right? So there's the existing psychosocial hazard landscape, which could have been that high demand. We've come in, the change project has introduced more as a result, and now we might not have been in a place of, if I think of that severity, duration, frequency, we might not have been in that bad a place before based on those. We might have been teetering. Now it's danger. Now it's danger. Now, with respect to you guys, that's something we need to be careful of. I see this as a great opportunity for you guys to be able to more effectively implement whatever you want, whatever is in your wheelhouse. The flip side is that you guys can do a little bit of damage if you don't consider it too. And that's why we all associate change with being so difficult at times, why poor change can be such a hazard. I digress. Ooh.
So, Alex, we've got a couple more minutes.
Yep, we're nearly there. I promise.
Cool.
What are some things we can look at? I've touched on these in a few different ways, especially the E's there. Empathy, I want to call out, but I really want to call out that co-design one. That's important because I said important at the beginning, and it is. If I don't cover it, I'll be filthy with myself. I shouldn't have left it towards the end. There is research out there existing. You can go look at that article down the bottom, which talks about the co-design process, the human-centered design process, and the effective management of well-being. And it's what I love about that article is it references 3 well-being aspects: physical health, psychological health, and psychological well-being. There's 3 domains that they reference in that article. I can't remember how they break it down. And there's the analysis suggests that using these principles will increase well-being across all 3 domains. Job satisfaction was the other one. So physical health, psychological health, job satisfaction are all improved by the inclusion of these co-design principles. Using this the deep knowledge, expertise of staff. People are the experts at what they do in the business. I'm working in finance at the moment. I haven't worked in finance before. It's confusing. Luckily, I'm surrounded by thousands of people who are experts at finance, right? I'm never going to be an expert at finance. I know that straight away. I can read and I can upskill, I can learn, but these people have been doing it for a long time. They're embedded. It's deep knowledge. It's not me reading an article here or there or doing a half-day training program or looking at some online learning materials. Really lived experience, that's important. Smooths the change process, so we're not riding the up and downs, so less fluctuation. We've smoothed out the journey. It calls out both individual resources that we need, self-efficacy, resilience, hope, and optimism. You guys might be familiar with some of the models that's from there, the kind of PERMA stuff. And then the organizational factors, which a lot of processes don't do well, the combination. The psychosocial landscape should do it. If you do it well, you need it. You need to understand the individual and the organization. We don't exist or operate in a vacuum. Same for this change process and the power of co-design. Again, I know I'd be speaking to the converted here, but double down on it. And this is just about that change effectiveness. This is about the well-being of people. This is about the two incidences that I referenced earlier, one which resulted in a suicide, the other in long-term post-traumatic stress, and countless other examples like it. There was a PwC. Forgive me if it's not. I want to say PwC had a suicide in the office. Late at night. You know, this is the opportunity that everyone in this room has to be caretakers of people's health and not just a change process, which, like, for me is so, obviously I'm biased as a psychologist, but I think that is so powerful. And why I wrote down my why at the beginning that I told you guys about, because you guys are going to be the leaders of this stuff. You guys are going to be the ones that make a really powerful difference in someone's life. Could save a life, literally. So I think that's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Round of applause for Alex. Amazing job there. Lots of questions, lots of engagement in the chat. Look, we'd hope for a bit of time for questions, but not an issue. Join our Space for Change group. If you're already there, I'll put a post up. And if you've got any questions, Alex frequents the group here and there. And Michelle's definitely in it as well. So any questions after this, let's pop it in the Space for Change group and we can get to that. Just to end off, really beautiful points around co-design. We've got you covered. So this is something that we're really passionate about. And now that we've got a lot of ammunition around co-design, no executive can argue with us now. So if you are sort of new to the space, or you're feeling like you want to get a little bit more into the co-design specific to change, or build up your digital muscle to do this digitally, Hugo's going to put a link in the chat. Just talk to us. We've got a lot of content. We've got a lot of learning. We've got a lot of stuff. So feel free to talk to our team if you're looking to set up your change with a co-design and reap those benefits. So that'll be in the chat. And where to from here is we'll be sending you some snackable highlights. So what Hugo's going to be doing with Anna is we'll go through this. We'll have the recording available for you as well if you want to look at that. With Alex's permission, we'll also share the PDF. But we'll also send you some emails with some snackable highlights because there was a lot to digest today. So look out for those emails on your dashboard and join the Alliance and the conversation at Space for Change. And just to end off, I'd love it if you jumped in the chat. What was your one best thing from today? What was your one takeaway? We'd love to hear from you. And I'll call them out. Andrew's music. Thanks, Alex. The importance of co-design. Thank you, B. Thanks for all co-design. Longer session next time. There's so much to learn. Maybe we'll do a satellite after that, but we needed to start somewhere. There is a family of people wanting to implement this practice in work. Isn't that awesome? The value hierarchy. I love that, JP. I love a good triangle. I love the notion of small steps being good steps. Nate, that was my favorite as well. Awesome session. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting. My pleasure, Rebecca. The distinction of safety is not psychosocial safety. Brilliant. Ditto on co-design. Inclusion, empathy, and honesty is so important. Great one from Alex there. Importance of intentionality. Not all hazards are risk. So stress and resistance is not suddenly a psychosocial hazard and an excuse for underperformance. Longer session, caretakers of people's health, psychological hazards as another reiteration point of why we need a co-design. the value hierarchy, and yes, it was E&Y, not PwC, by the way. Thanks for that. Importance of context, and it takes a village. Oh man, these are wonderful, folks. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. So from all of us, thank you, Alex, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Michelle. It was also good to see Temre. I don't know if Temre is still there. Temre is also a really good person to connect with around mental health in the workplace and change. So reach out to Temre as well. I saw she joined. And guys, have an interstellar week. And thank you for joining us this morning. Take care.